6 Johnny Carson guests who were too honest on TV. America thought it knew Johnny Carson, the perfect host, master of ceremonies, and keeper of late-night decorum. His guests were supposed to stick to the unwritten rules, promote your project, tell a funny story, laugh at Johnny's jokes, and save the real dirt for after the cameras stopped rolling. But some guests didn't just cross the line, they erased it completely. In the sanitized world of network television, where even married couples slept in separate beds and bathroom humor meant jokes about hairspray, The Tonight Show occasionally erupted into something raw, confessional, and far too honest for 1970s America. These weren't just celebrities who cursed or made risque jokes, they were people who revealed their most intimate truths, confessed to scandalous behaviors, and named names in ways that left Carson scrambling for the commercial break button. Johnny's greatest skill wasn't getting people to talk, it was knowing when to shut them up, explains former NBC executive Thomas Reynolds. But certain guests arrived ready to purge their souls on national television. They weren't being provocative for shock value. They were sharing their actual lives, consequences be damned. And that was infinitely more dangerous. The difference between guests with no filter and those who were too honest? Intent. No filter guests enjoyed pushing boundaries and breaking rules. But these too honest guests were something else entirely. They were using The Tonight Show as public confession booth, therapy session, and autobiography all rolled into one nationally televised moment. Today, we're revisiting 6 times The Tonight Show, accidentally transformed from light entertainment into raw, uncomfortable truth, when guests brought real life crashing into America's living rooms, and Johnny Carson couldn't stop the flood once the emotional dams broke.
But in Harper, I was supposed to have been drunk through the whole picture.
Yes.
And he said, I made love to you for 3 days.
The Hollywood bedpost, Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters wasn't just an Academy Award-winning actress. She was a walking, talking Hollywood tell-all who treated Johnny Carson's couch like her personal confessional booth. Long before Kiss and Tell memoirs became standard celebrity fare, Winters was naming names, sharing intimate details, and confirming Hollywood rumors with a candor that left network censors reaching for the mute button. Winters told Johnny she slept with most of Hollywood and never regretted it, explains entertainment historian Margaret Collins. This wasn't just shocking because of the content. It was revolutionary because Winters was a respected, Oscar-winning actress, openly discussing her sexual history at a time when women were expected to maintain at least the pretense of modesty, especially on network television. What made Winters' revelations particularly explosive wasn't just their explicit nature, but her willingness to identify her famous partners by name, transforming vague gossip into confirmed history directly from a primary source who seemed completely unconcerned about the potential fallout. She named names, including Marlon Brando, on air, Collins continues, in an era when publicists carefully managed stars' images and networks actively avoided celebrity scandals. Winters' casual confirmation of her relationship with Brando, along with numerous other Hollywood legends, violated the industry's unwritten code of protecting famous reputations. She wasn't just exposing her own private life, but implicating others who might have preferred discretion. Winters' approach to these revelations was particularly striking for its lack of embarrassment or regret. Unlike the confessional mode that would later become common in celebrity interviews, where stars admitted past indiscretions with appropriate expressions of remorse, Winters spoke about her romantic history with unapologetic satisfaction. She once said, "Some stars acted. I acted up in their beds," notes Collins. This deliberate wordplay demonstrated her comfort with her sexual history, presenting her relationships not as mistakes or scandals, but as natural aspects of her Hollywood experience that she looked back on with fond amusement rather than shame. Carson's reactions to these revelations became part of the entertainment. His widened eyes, nervous laughter, and occasional attempts to steer the conversation toward safer territory, creating a comedic counterpoint to Winters' unfiltered honesty. The visible discomfort of television's most comfortable host underscored just how far Winters was transgressing the medium's unstated boundaries. She didn't flirt, she confessed, and it got messy. This observation captures the essential nature of Winters' approach, not the playful suggestiveness that female guests often employed on talk shows, but straightforward declarations about her intimate life, delivered with the matter-of-fact candor of someone sharing a recipe rather than revealing sexual history on national television. What made Winters' honesty particularly significant was its challenge to gendered double standards about sexuality. In an era when male stars often received winking approval for their playboy reputations, while sexually active women were labeled with derogatory terms, Winters claimed the right to discuss her relationships with the same casual ownership that men had long enjoyed, refusing shame or apology for having lived a life that included multiple passionate connections. Winters' appearances helped establish a template for celebrity candor that would eventually become standard across media platforms. The frank acknowledgement of personal history as legitimate content rather than shameful secret. Her willingness to discuss her romantic past without embarrassment or regret helped normalize the idea that women's sexual histories weren't inherently scandalous, but simply part of their life experiences, worthy of discussion rather than concealment. The stark contrast between Winters' matter-of-fact honesty and the euphemistic, heavily sanitized approach to sexuality that dominated television during this era revealed just how completely the medium had suppressed authentic discussion of human relationships, creating an artificial world where basic aspects of adult experience remained unacknowledged until guests like Winters forced them into public conversation.
Now than it was the very first film.
Well,
The raw confession, Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor didn't just push boundaries on The Tonight Show, he obliterated them, turning Carson's couch into a confessional where he shared stories so raw and personal that network executives reportedly begged Carson never to ask him certain questions again. Unlike comedians who played with taboo topics for shock value, Pryor brought genuine lived experience to television that had never seen anything like his unvarnished truth. Pryor talked explicitly about drug binges, sex parties, and nearly burning himself to death while freebasing, explains comedy historian Dr. James Morrison. What distinguished Pryor's honesty from mere provocation was its autobiographical authenticity. He wasn't discussing these subjects to shock or titillate, but sharing his actual life experiences, including deeply painful ones, with a frankness television simply wasn't designed to accommodate. The most extraordinary example came after Pryor's near-fatal accident in 1980, when he set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine, an incident that left him with burns over 50% of his body and a lengthy, painful recovery. Rather than avoiding this traumatic event or creating a sanitized version for television, Pryor discussed it with shocking directness on The Tonight Show. He said, "You ever light your face on fire? That's when you know the night went too far," Morrison continues. This wasn't just pushing boundaries of acceptable television content. It was transforming personal trauma into both comedy and authentic human testimony about addiction, self-destruction, and survival. The audience reaction mixed uncomfortable laughter with genuine shock at hearing such raw truth on network television. Carson's response to Pryor's revelations revealed the host's own complexity, recognizing the extraordinary value of authentic testimony while also aware of his responsibility to maintain a program that wouldn't trigger network intervention. This balancing act created some of The Tonight Show's most electric moments, with Carson simultaneously encouraging Pryor's honesty while monitoring for content that might cross from daring to potentially unbroadcastable. Carson couldn't stop laughing, or stop the FCC, notes Morrison. This tension between Carson's evident appreciation for Pryor's authenticity and his awareness of broadcast standards created a fascinating meta-narrative during their interactions. Viewers could watch Carson navigating between his roles as entertainer, enjoying groundbreaking comedy, and network employee responsible for maintaining program standards. What made Pryor's revelations particularly significant wasn't just their explicit content, but their unapologetic portrayal of experiences typically excluded from mainstream media, especially when shared by a black performer to a predominantly white audience. His willingness to discuss racism, police harassment, drug addiction, and sexual experiences brought perspectives to television that the medium had systematically excluded. He brought his trauma and turned it into dirty gospel. This observation captures the transformative nature of Pryor's approach, the way he elevated potentially sensationalistic material into something approaching testimony or witness, using humor to deliver truth without diminishing its essential seriousness. This approach distinguished his honesty from mere shock value, creating space for authentic human experience within an entertainment context. Pryor's appearances helped establish that certain truths required explicit language and uncomfortable details. that sanitizing lived experience could constitute a form of dishonesty that diminished important realities. By refusing to soften his testimony to meet television's comfortable standards, he demonstrated that certain stories could only be told authentically by violating the medium's conventional boundaries. The contrast between Pryor's Tonight Show appearances and most television discourse about drug addiction during this period reveals how revolutionary his approach truly was. At a time when discussions of substance abuse on network television typically featured either sensationalized very special episodes or simplified cautionary tales, Pryor brought nuanced first-person testimony about the complex realities of addiction, including both its destruction and the humanity of those in its grip. Pryor's honesty created a template for how authentic lived experience could function within mainstream entertainment, demonstrating that personal testimony, even about deeply uncomfortable subjects, could create compelling television while expanding audience understanding of realities typically excluded from public discourse. This approach influenced generations of performers who followed, particularly those using humor to address difficult truths.
I would moan, you know.
Sometimes that's exciting.
But he said stop it because he couldn't hear the TV.
The name dropper, Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers transformed celebrity gossip from backstage whispers to front-stage entertainment, using The Tonight Show to share industry secrets that publicists, studios, and network executives had spent decades keeping from public view. Her willingness to expose Hollywood's carefully hidden realities, often while naming specific stars, made her appearances both exhilarating and anxiety-producing for Carson and his team. Rivers roasted her own sex life, plastic surgery, and called out cheating actors by name, notes television historian Thomas Henderson. What distinguished her approach from typical talk show banter wasn't just its explicit content, but its specificity. Rivers didn't just hint at generic celebrity misbehavior, but identified particular stars and their specific transgressions, violating the entertainment industry's unwritten code of mutual protection. Unlike gossip columnists who relied on unnamed sources or vague, blind items, Rivers presented herself as direct witness to the behavior she described, lending her revelations an authenticity that made them particularly problematic for celebrities who might otherwise have dismissed them as mere rumor. Her insider status as a working comedian with access to Hollywood's private spaces gave her claims credibility that ordinary gossip lacked. She said, "You think your favorite star is loyal? Please. I've seen them drop their pants between takes," Henderson continues. This type of specific allegation, suggesting direct personal knowledge of sexual behavior on production sets, transformed vague rumors into credible testimony. Rivers positioned herself not as someone repeating gossip, but as someone reporting observed reality from within Hollywood's normally closed environments. Carson's reactions to these revelations became part of the viewing experience, his visible discomfort creating an additional layer of tension as audiences watched him trying to maintain the show's forward momentum while clearly concerned about potential consequences from the celebrities Rivers was discussing. This dynamic created a meta-narrative about the gap between public image and private reality in entertainment. Johnny looked frozen. She kept going. This observation captures the power dynamic that developed during Rivers' most revealing moments, the way her momentum could temporarily overwhelm even Carson's legendary control of his program. These instances demonstrated how authentic disclosure could disrupt television's careful management of information, creating moments where truth briefly overpowered the medium's filtering mechanisms. What made Rivers' revelations particularly significant was how they exposed the machinery behind celebrity image-making, revealing not just individual stars' misbehaviors, but the systematic deception involved in presenting sanitized versions of celebrities to the public. By discussing plastic surgery, studio cover-ups, and manufactured relationships, she pulled back the curtain on Hollywood's entire apparatus of image management. She had no filter and no fear, especially when she was naming names. This fearlessness distinguished Rivers from guests who might make general comments about industry hypocrisy without identifying specific individuals. By naming particular celebrities, she created genuine risk for herself, potential lawsuits, professional retaliation, and industry blacklisting, demonstrating a commitment to truth-telling that transcended career calculation. Rivers' revelations helped establish a more skeptical audience relationship with celebrity culture, encouraging viewers to question the carefully constructed public personas presented through mainstream media. Her insider perspective revealed how completely entertainment coverage was controlled by publicists and studios, creating artificial narratives that bore little relationship to stars' actual lives and behaviors. The contrast between Rivers' candid descriptions of celebrity reality and the reverential coverage that dominated entertainment media during this period revealed the extraordinary gap between public presentation and private truth in Hollywood culture. Her willingness to expose this disconnection created a form of media literacy training for audiences, teaching them to recognize the constructed nature of celebrity narratives typically presented as authentic. Rivers' approach anticipated the tabloid transformation and reality television revolution that would eventually remake entertainment media, establishing that celebrities' actual behaviors and appearances could be legitimate content rather than carefully guarded secrets. Her willingness to discuss topics like plastic surgery, sexual impropriety, and professional misconduct helped normalize public conversation about previously concealed aspects of entertainment industry reality.
And they didn't like me to have as my eighth husband a prince. They wanted me to have a butcher as my eighth husband, which would have been not so bad either, because if the butcher is sexy and exciting, why not?
The scandalous socialite Zsa Gabor. Zsa Gabor brought European frankness to American television that shattered the medium's puritanical pretenses, treating Carson's audience to unapologetic discussions of her romantic adventures that violated every unwritten rule about how women, particularly glamorous women, were supposed to discuss their intimate lives on network television. Gabor admitted she had 9 husbands and twice that many lovers, explains celebrity historian Rebecca Santos. What made her candor particularly striking wasn't just its content, but its presentation. Gabor discussed her extensive romantic history not with shame or embarrassment, but with evident pride and amusement, treating her numerous relationships as achievements to be celebrated rather than secrets to be hidden. Unlike American actresses, who typically maintained at least the pretense of conventional morality in public appearances, Gabor brought a distinctly European sensibility to television, the sophisticated worldliness of someone unburdened by American Puritanism and genuinely perplexed by the need to pretend that beautiful women weren't sexually active. This continental approach extended to her interactions with Carson himself, whom she flirted with openly, despite the typical professional boundaries of the host-guest relationship. Rather than maintaining the polite distance expected in the interview format, Gabor treated their conversations as potential romantic preliminaries, creating tension that both amused and occasionally flustered the normally unflappable host. She flirted with Johnny live, called him a man with a big microphone and a small knee watch, Santos continues. This sexual innuendo, delivered with Gabor's characteristic accent and theatrical timing, created moments where the audience understood she was suggesting something far more explicit than the literal meaning of her words. This technique allowed her to discuss sexuality in ways that technically complied with broadcast standards, while clearly communicating adult content. Gabor's approach wasn't limited to verbal provocations. Her physical presence on the show, touching Carson, adjusting her clothing to emphasize her figure, and using exaggerated gestures to draw attention to her body, created a performance of sexuality that transcended the program's typical verbal limitations. This multi-dimensional approach allowed her to communicate far more explicitly than language alone would have permitted. She once slapped a guest off camera before walking on, notes Santos. This incident, though not visible to the television audience, created an electricity that carried into her on-camera appearance. The knowledge among studio audience members that genuine conflict had occurred backstage, adding an additional layer of tension and authenticity to the broadcast interaction. Gabor brought real-world drama into the typically controlled television environment. What distinguished Gabor from mere provocateurs was the authentic integration of her public and private personas. She wasn't playing a character or deliberately creating controversy, but simply being herself, without the self-censorship typically expected of television guests. This authenticity made her revelations particularly compelling, as audiences recognized they were seeing the actual woman rather than a performance created for broadcast. She didn't do interviews. She performed scandals. This observation captures Gabor's distinctive approach, the way she transformed the typically restrained talk show format into something closer to a one-woman show about her romantic adventures. Rather than responding to questions with appropriate discretion, she used Carson's program as a platform for autobiographical performance that prioritized entertainment value over conventional propriety. What made Gabor's honesty particularly significant was its challenge to gendered double standards about sexuality and aging. At a time when mature women were expected to downplay their continued sexual interests and romantic histories, Gabor openly celebrated both her past relationships and ongoing pursuit of pleasure, refusing to adopt the desexualized identity often imposed on women past their 20s. Gabor's appearances helped establish that female sexuality didn't require justification or apology, that women could discuss their romantic lives with the same unapologetic candor long permitted to men. Her comfort with her own history and desires created space for more authentic female expression on television, challenging the medium's typically restrictive portrayal of acceptable womanhood. The contrast between Gabor's European frankness and American television's puritanical tendencies revealed the cultural constructedness of broadcast standards, demonstrating that what counted as inappropriate reflected specific cultural values rather than universal propriety. Her continental perspective highlighted American media's particular hang-ups about sexuality, especially when discussed by women rather than men.
See, now listen, John, I was coming here tonight and I saw the most deplorable thing happen. A fella got on the bus and was molesting a lady on the bus.
Good heavens.
And I mean, she took a knife out of her purse and stabbed him right in the hand.
Oh.
Now, if you ever catch this bus on Wilshire.
The racial truth teller, Red Fox. Red Fox brought something to The Tonight Show that had been systematically excluded from network television: unfiltered black perspective on race, sexuality, and American hypocrisy, delivered without the self-censorship typically required of black performers in white-dominated media. His appearances represented rare moments of authentic racial discourse in an otherwise carefully sanitized television landscape. Fox told explicit sex jokes on live TV and called out racial double standards, explains cultural historian Dr. Robert Thompson. What made his approach particularly revolutionary wasn't just its content, but its refusal to accommodate white comfort. Fox discussed race and sexuality with the same directness he brought to predominantly black nightclub audiences, forcing network television to temporarily accommodate black communicative traditions rather than requiring him to adapt to white expectations. Unlike many black performers who developed separate personas for white and black audiences, Fox maintained remarkable consistency across contexts, bringing to Carson's show the same essential perspective he delivered in comedy clubs and on his party records, adult-oriented comedy albums marketed primarily to black audiences. This authenticity challenged television's typical requirement that black performers modify their expression to accommodate white sensibilities. He once said, "I've had more white women than Johnny's had monologues." Thompson continues. This provocative statement simultaneously addressed racial taboos around interracial relationships, challenged assumptions about black male sexuality, and positioned Fox's experience in direct comparison with Carson's professional achievement, creating a multi-layered statement that functioned as both comedy and commentary on American racial dynamics. The audience reaction to such statements became part of the viewing experience. The audible gasps and nervous laughter revealing how completely Fox's candor violated television's unstated boundaries. These responses demonstrated the gap between private understanding and public acknowledgement of American racial realities, topics widely known but rarely discussed openly in mainstream media contexts. The audience gasped. Johnny turned red. This observation captures the momentary disruption created by Fox's honesty, the way his direct statements temporarily shattered the polite fictions that typically govern television discourse about race. Carson's visible discomfort represented the broader social discomfort with authentic racial dialogue that Fox's appearances temporarily forced into public view. What made Fox's honesty particularly significant was its challenge to television's systematic exclusion of authentic black perspectives. At a time when network television portrayed an almost entirely white vision of America, with black characters and performers carefully confined to non-threatening roles, Fox brought uncompromised blackness directly into American living rooms, refusing to dilute his identity for white comfort. You booked Red? You knew it was going off the rails. This understanding among television professionals demonstrated Fox's reputation for authentic expression regardless of medium constraints, the recognition that he would bring his unfiltered perspective to the program despite its broadcast limitations. This expectation distinguished Fox from performers who might adapt their content to different platforms, maintaining consistent authenticity across contexts. Fox's appearances helped establish that black perspectives deserved inclusion in mainstream media without requiring modification to suit white expectations, that authentic cultural expression could and should exist within network television rather than being confined to segregated entertainment spaces. This principle influenced subsequent media development, contributing to more inclusive representation over time. The contrast between Fox's direct discussions of race and the typical avoidance of racial realities on network television revealed the medium's fundamental dishonesty about American society, the way it systematically excluded authentic dialogue about one of the nation's most defining characteristics. Fox's refusal to participate in this dishonesty, even temporarily for television appearances, represented a significant challenge to media's role in maintaining comfortable fictions about American racial dynamics.
In the women's liberationists, if they thought about that, shh, quiet, woman. Women's liberationists.
The Dangerous Guest. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed brought something to American television that the carefully controlled medium rarely encountered: genuine, unmanaged danger. The British actor, known for powerful performances and equally powerful drinking habits, approached The Tonight Show not as a promotional opportunity requiring careful navigation, but as another setting for authentic self-expression, regardless of potential consequences. Reed appeared drunk, unfiltered, and aggressive, notes international film historian Margaret Collins. What distinguished Reed from merely provocative guests was the authentic volatility he brought to the program, not calculated boundary pushing, but genuine unpredictability that created palpable tension for everyone involved. Carson wasn't just managing problematic content, but potentially explosive human behavior that could escalate beyond television's capacity to contain it. Unlike American celebrities trained to present sanitized versions of themselves for television appearances, Reed brought an unfiltered British frankness combined with his notorious drinking habits, creating television that felt dangerous in ways American audiences rarely experienced within the typically controlled network environment. He hit on female guests, challenged Carson to a fight, and rambled about orgies in London, Collins continues. These weren't merely provocative topics, but potentially disruptive behaviors that threatened the basic functionality of the program itself. Reed's appearances required Carson to simultaneously entertain the audience while preventing his guest from completely derailing the broadcast through increasingly unpredictable conduct. What made Reed particularly challenging for American television was his complete disregard for the medium's unwritten rules about appropriate behavior. Where most guests implicitly understood certain boundaries shouldn't be crossed, Reed approached The Tonight Show with the same unrestrained attitude he brought to London pubs, creating a fundamental mismatch between his authentic expression and television's requirements for controlled performance. This collision between Reed's unfiltered personality and television's constraints created moments of genuine human interaction rarely seen in the typically scripted medium, revealing the artifice of most celebrity appearances by contrast with Reed's unmanaged authenticity. Despite the potential problems this authenticity created, it also delivered compelling viewing precisely because it felt genuinely unpredictable in ways most television deliberately avoided. Shelley Winters later threw a drink in his face backstage. This incident, though not visible to television audiences, represented the real-world consequences of Reed's unfiltered approach, the way his authentic self-expression created not just content issues, but genuine interpersonal conflicts that extended beyond the broadcast itself. This reality television quality distinguished Reed's appearances from the more contained controversy generated by merely provocative language. What made Reed's honesty particularly significant was how it revealed television's limited capacity to contain authentic human behavior, the way genuine unpredictability could overwhelm the medium's controlling mechanisms and create moments where real life temporarily intruded into the carefully managed entertainment environment. These ruptures exposed the constructed nature of typical television interaction, by contrast with Reed's unmanaged presence. He wasn't just too honest, he was dangerous. This observation captures the essential quality that distinguished Reed from merely provocative guests: the sense that his appearance created not just content challenges but potential physical unpredictability that transcended typical broadcast concerns. This quality created a viewing experience more akin to live theater than television, with the genuine possibility of unexpected developments beyond the production's control. Reed's appearances helped establish the entertainment value of authentic human unpredictability at a time when television typically prioritized control and predictability. Despite the challenges his behavior created, his segments demonstrated audience interest in genuine human interaction rather than merely scripted performance, a principle that would eventually influence reality television's development as a genre built around capturing authentic human behavior within structured environments. The contrast between Reed's unfiltered British approach and American television's careful management revealed cultural differences in entertainment expectations. The way British media more readily accommodated authentic human behavior, while American television typically required more extensive self-censorship from participants. This distinction highlighted television standards' cultural specificity rather than universal applicability.